Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a card as part of the Newton's Nook Inky Paws challenge. They have a new challenge out today, and it is to do a one-layer card. And this was pretty scary for me because it's not really something that I do very often. I'm so tempted to work on a panel and then attach it to a card in case I make any mistakes or I don't quite like the way the direction is going. I don't feel as committed to the whole card. But I decided that it would be a fun challenge and would help me grow to, give it a shot and do something where I had to be really confident and careful in it. And so I have my card here, and I'm going to be working directly onto the card base. I am stamping the little bunny from the Bunny Hop stamp set from Newton's Nook, and I'm using archival jet black ink from Ranger because I will be using colored pencil, and the colored pencils, the Spectrum Noir blendables, work pretty well with basically any black ink, and so I just use the archival because it is pretty crisp. Now, because this is a one-layer card, and if I make a mistake, I have to definitely cover it up, and I can't really put any layers on it to cover it up. So I'm trying to be very careful, and you see there that I brought out my heat gun, and I actually heated the stamped image to make sure that it wouldn't smear, and I'm going to keep doing that. I just want to be super careful in this instance. I'm going to be doing some masking and using a stencil, and I'll even show you how you can extend your stencil. If your stencil isn't quite as big as your card, I'll show you one way you can extend that in a design that might seem a little bit more tricky at first to extend. And I have stamped the two eggs next to him. And in this case, I'm covering everything with masking paper because, like I said, I'll be doing the stenciling. But it also allows me to create the effect of the eggs being behind the bunny because I stamped the bunny first and then laid a mask on top of him. And that will mean that the bunny image is the only complete image and everything else is a partial image where the eggs will essentially look behind him and behind each other. So I'm going to do a little gathering of 3 eggs because, as I've said many times, groups of odds generally tend to look better, so I'm going to use the 3 eggs here. Once I've stamped all of the images and I've covered them with masking, I'm going to move on to my stencil work. You saw at the beginning of the video that I used a little bit of painter's tape to hold down my card base, and I'll be using painter's tape throughout the card to help me to get the stencils down and things like that. I want to create a little grassy area for the bunny to be sitting in. I could have used a grass dye and masked off the area that way, but I decided to keep it a little bit more simple so that the focus would be on the sunburst stencil that I'll be using. And I just used some post-it notes to create a straight line across the bottom and mask off the top. And then I'm taking a little bit of Mowed Lawn Distress ink and just blending it down onto the bottom there. Because I'm only using the one color, I'm basically just trying to get a pretty solid coverage. It doesn't have to be too solid because obviously grass doesn't appear all one color. And then once I have that area dry, and again I hit it with a heat gun because like I said I don't want to mess anything up, I don't want any ink smudges, I'm going to be moving on to the sunburst stencil. So I cover up the area that's now green, which are essentially the grass area, and I want to add the sunburst on top. But I want the sun to be right around the bunny to pull all the highlight into that part of the card. And if I lay the sun right over the bunny, the sun rays do not extend all the way across the card front. And I will be working to fix that later on in the card. And in this instance, you can't really just move the stencil over and create more of the stencil pattern. Like a typical stencil, you could just move it over, line it up, and continue going, but that's a little bit more difficult because the sun rays are getting wider as they go. And so I'll show you how I address that later. I also masked off the back of the card in this instance because I wanted to make sure that the ink would only go where I want it to go. I'm using spiced marmalade, wild honey, and mustard seed, I believe, distressing, so it might be squeezed lemonade though. So just 2 oranges and a yellow, and I'm starting with the darkest orange, the spiced marmalade in the middle, and then moving out to the yellow color. I used painter's tape to adhere my stencil down because I want to make sure that I don't get any slipping on it, although there's pretty wide openings on this one and it's not quite as delicate of a stencil, but just a couple pieces of tape to hold it down. I start by laying on each color, and then I go back with the yellow and blend the yellow into the wild honey, and then I take the wild honey ink blender and blend it out into the spiced marmalade. When I finished this part, I thought, well, I could potentially try to trim the card base and just make a smaller card. But as I was looking at it and thinking about all the masking I'd done, I thought, well, I could just take Post-it notes and mask off the sun rays and continue this stenciled pattern. And so that's what I decided to do. You see there, I first dried it to get all that distress ink down. And then I just took the Post-it notes and laid them right along part of the sun ray. And by making sure it matches up with the edge of the sun ray, as it extends out, it will become in line with the existing sun ray. And then I covered both sides and the top so that the back of the card is protected. And here this is where I use the squeezed lemonade and I blend out from mustard seed into squeezed lemonade. And so I'll use both of those inks here to get this effect. And again, I'm always hitting it with the heat gun in between, because when you work with distress inks, you can have some smudging and smearing, as they do take a little bit of time to dry, which is generally a great property because it helps with blending, but can be a little bit tricky in terms of keeping everything clean. And this card I'm obviously going for a more kind of clean look, as I'm leaving that white space in between there. They're in between the stencils, and I'm not going to be filling that in with any sort of blue background color. And I'll keep doing that until all of the rays are completely extended. When working with these distress inks, just since I have an extra minute here to share with you, I do keep my circle foam blenders on the bottom of each distress pad, because I have the large pads, and so I put a little bit of Velcro on the back of them. I am not going to switch over to the small pads because I have so many of the large pads already. It doesn't make sense for me, and I have the storage space for them. But I keep a foam for each color of distress ink, and then I have 4 blender tools, because in these kinds of instances I do tend to work with 3 or 4 colors at a time, and I find it easier to have several blending tools so that I can have each color out at the same time. Once I finish the stenciling, I am ready to remove the masks around the bunny and eggs. And I decided to do the coloring last just in case the stenciling techniques did not work out. And I'm going to be coloring them, as I said before, with the Spectrum Noir blendable colored pencils. I'm going to be using some brown colors for the bunny and then just some blues and purples for the eggs. I only have one set of the Spectrum Noir blendable pencils, and I do really enjoy them. It gives me a slightly different look than the Copics. It's great in this instance for one layer card because it won't bleed through. If I used Copic markers here and you open the card, you'd be able to see them through the card, and that's not the look that I want to go for in this instance. And so these pencils work out great. I'm going to lay down the lightest color and blend it with Gamsol, then move on to the darker colors. A really great thing about the Spectrum Noir blendable pencils is that they have little color families for you. So there's like a group of 3 purples, and then a group of 3 blues, and a group of 3 browns. And so you don't have to worry about picking out which colors will blend well together. That kind of guesswork is done for you. It's not to say that you have to stick to those, but if you're not sure of your color combinations, you can go to them. You'll see there that I rounded the bottom corners of the card as well, just for a little extra detail. I'd kind of been intending to do that from the start, but instead of doing it right away, I wanted, again, just to make sure everything worked out and to see if that's really what I wanted to do in the end. So I used a simple corner chomper there. For the blending on the bunny, I'm using the darker colors on the side of the bunny to give it more of an effect of being rounded, give it some dimension, so that the middle of the bunny looks closest to you, as the lighter colors do kind of tend to draw your eye and give it that rounded effect. And I also like colored pencils for coloring animals with fur, because I feel like the colored pencils give you a little bit more texture than the Copics without special techniques. Like, you can definitely get really awesome fur techniques with Copics, and I don't mean to say that you can't, but you don't have to use as much effort to get that look with the colored pencils. And so, coloring in these small areas, I prefer just to go with the colored pencils. To color the eggs, I'm going to use the darker colors on the top and the bottom of the eggs again to create that rounded effect, but also add a little bit of a darker shadow where the eggs meet. And like I said, I'm just going to use a combination of purples and blues. I'm not sure that these would have been my ideal colors, but looking at the limited color selection that I have, I thought that these would be best suited for the Easter eggs. And as I'm not pulling these colors in throughout the whole card, I'm not concerned that there isn't the sort of same, like I tend to use visual triangles where I will place the same color in 3 different spots on a card, but in this instance, because I'm not doing a lot of layering, I'm not really using that as much. And in fact, I actually don't have any visual triangle at all on this card, because there is the large grouping of the bunny and the eggs and the sun all together, and then the sentiment floating out in the top right. So there's a little bit of balance in terms of it, the sentiment balancing out the pictures, but it's not a visual triangle. So that's it for my card today. If you enjoyed this video, you can give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafty videos, you can subscribe to my channel. I'm going to leave you a link to the Newton's Nook Inky Paws Challenge so that you can participate along with us if you are brave enough to try a 1-layer card. Thanks for watching. Bye.